Hello, everyone. Welcome to the June installment of the SPE London Net Zero Program's monthly Lunch and Learn. Today's talk is a coffee hour chat with representatives from 3 of the UK's most visible geothermal projects. We have Hazel Farndale, Business Development Manager from Geothermal Engineering Ltd, representing the United Downs Deep Geothermal Project in Cornwall. Next, we'll have Tony Bennett, Operations Director from Eden Geothermal, who will be speaking about the Eden Geothermal Heat and Energy Generation Project, also in Cornwall. And finally, we'll have David Townsend, Founder and CEO of TownRock Energy, who will be speaking about BODYHEAT, a novel approach to shallow geothermal heat storage based out of Scotland. As today's talks are focused on geothermal energy, they are also being hosted as part of the SPE Europe Special Geothermal Talk Series. So welcome to those of you who are joining us from outside the UK. Before we begin, I'm going to ask Gabriel Gubrak from the SPE Europe to pop on and introduce their Special Geothermal Talk Series. Gabriel?
Hi, thank you, Kate. Hello, everyone. My name is Gabriel Gubrak. And essentially what the Special Geothermal Talks are is a unified effort from 10 different sections across Europe, as you can see, all the way from Romania, Austria, Netherlands, London, Central Ukraine section, Turkey, Spain, Italy, Denmark, Croatia. We got together and we said, okay, we need to collaborate more. And this was the efforts that we had started. So essentially what we're doing is monthly sessions that focus on geothermal energy, well, in whatever aspect of it that there is. And the plan is to keep doing it for this year to diversify the knowledge among us and get a little more communication between professionals that are strictly in geothermal and the professionals that are in the oil and gas industry that can learn a lot more from each other and hopefully help boost this drive for the future, right? If you put me to the next slide, Kate, I just wanted to give an understanding to the audience of what we did until now. So we had started with Dr. Richter. He did a presentation back in January on low enthalpy geothermal. And then we followed up with upcycling of hydrocarbon wells with Mr. Werner Donke from Greenwell. Our third talk was hosted by SPE Netherlands, Dr. Omrani Pejman. He talked a lot about the vital role of operational expenditure, so looking a little bit of that aspect of geothermal. And then we just recently had last month a talk on the development of geothermal business in Croatia, which was quite interesting, quite detailed. It's great to see what the other countries are doing and how can we talk more about it, right? What we're preparing for next month is a topic on repurposing the oil and gas wells. It is a challenge in certain places, and we're going to look at it from a different aspect. We'll have Sonia Lopez from SPE Spain presenting, and then we'll be bringing that out there for all of you ahead of time to promote it. Thank you very much for this, and I hope we keep going stronger and putting this message out there about geothermal and how much more can we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel, and thanks for introducing the Special Geothermal Talk Series. I think it's really interesting and, really important for the building geothermal industry to get that cross communication going. So I'm glad that we were able to be part of this talk series. Before we get started, I want to go over a bit of housekeeping. Standard webinar meeting rules apply. We ask that the audience please remain muted and keep your cameras turned off throughout the duration of this webinar. This is meant to be a coffee hour chat, and so we have saved a good amount of time at the end of the presentations for discussion. We hope you've come prepared to ask lots and lots of questions, and we ask that you type those questions into the chat box. You can do this throughout the presentations as they pop into your head. We just ask if they're for a specific presenter, please just indicate that in the text of your question. Like I said, we have about 20 minutes saved for questions, so we will get to as many as possible during the discussion session at the end. Finally, the session is being recorded and will be sent out via SPE London. As such, we ask that the audience refrain from making any additional recordings or distributing that themselves. And now, without further ado, I am going to hand things over to Hazel to kick things off. Hazel, if you're ready.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just share my screen.
Yeah.
If you could confirm you can see that, Kate?
Yes, no, looks good.
Lovely stuff. Well, thank you for having me today. Really appreciate it. So I'm going to give you a quick whistle-stop tour of some geothermal engineering's perspective on deep geothermal projects here in the UK. As Kate said, my name is Hazel Farndale. I am the Business Development Manager for Geothermal Engineering Ltd. My background is actually as a geologist. I have a master's, an integrated master's in earth sciences from Oxford. And I feel really lucky to be able to say that I started my career straight after university in the geothermal industry. So I started with a company called Hotspur Geothermal, based in London, but working out in Ethiopia, Indonesia, and the Philippines on more sort of standard volcanic related geothermal systems. Then had a couple of years out of the industry in the civil service and returned to geothermal engineering back in 2020. So I've been here now for about 2.5 years. More importantly, though, who are GEL? So GEL was set up back in 2008, a long time ago now, it feels, to prove that geothermal power is possible to be generated in the UK. We have several sort of projects, of which I'll mostly focus on United Downs as our sort of flagship demonstration project. So we're the owner, developer, and operator of that project here in Cornwall. We've also undertaken project management and operation of a geothermal pool project called Jubilee Pool down in Penzance, also in Cornwall. And we have an arm of our business. We have a joint venture with Over partners looking at deep geothermal single wells, repurposing oil and gas wells, mostly in northeast of the UK as well. So moving on to United Downs. So the aim of this project was always to prove that power and heat is possible to be generated from the hot granite beneath Cornwall. So the aim is to be the UK's first geothermal power plant, which is due to be installed from October this year and be commissioned roughly end of next year. Thus far, it's been about a £50 million project, and that's come from a variety of locations, the European Regional Development Fund, Cornwall Council, and a number of private investors, which more recently has included Keratin Capital and Thrive Renewables. So what are we doing? Very simply, we're sort of targeting the area of the UK which sort of has the lowest hanging fruit, as it were. It's this map on the left here shows you surface heat flow across the UK. You can see that Cornwall is quite obviously the sort of the first target you might hit when you're aiming for high temperatures. So you can see that the UK's average geothermal gradient is around 26 degrees Celsius, where down here in Cornwall, we commonly see more than 35 degrees Celsius. And that's due to the radiogenic granite body, which is generating natural heat down here. So then on the right-hand side, we've got a schematic diagram of what we're doing at United Downs. So we've drilled a geothermal doublet, and that is a deep production well down to about 5 kilometers depth, which is penetrating into a natural fault zone. That is where we will be sucking up the hot fluid from at about 180 degrees Celsius. We've got an electrical submersible pump about a kilometre down the well. It'll suck up the fluid to be used in a binary power plant, which can then be re-injected after it's used to a bit more than 2 kilometres depth. So why are we doing it? I just think this is really important to share, particularly to those new to geothermal. Is the sort of the 3 key benefits that we see of geothermal. So firstly, it's incredibly low carbon. So one estimate of a lifetime carbon assessment of deep geothermal in the UK showed that the carbon intensity is less than 5 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. Now you compare that to the recent UK government stats on 2023 grid electricity, you can see that was 207 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. It's been estimated that around a 5 megawatt plant can save around 700,000 tonnes of carbon compared to gas over its roughly 30-year lifetime. So it's a really significant saving, and that's on more than any other sort of solar and wind, as well as the obvious fossil fuels as well. It's really low impact, so it takes up a really small amount of land, particularly when you compare it to things like solar PV, but also a number of other technologies as well. And it's a secure energy supply. So it'll give you base load, almost 24/7, 365 days a year power and heat, only offline for sort of a week or 2 every year for maintenance. So it gives us that energy security that over the last couple of years in particular has been really, really important. So the United Downs project status at the moment, we drilled back in 2018, 2019, the photo on the left here. Our final testing phase of the 2 wells was in July 2021. The picture in the middle shows the UK's first geothermal steam, which was a very exciting couple of days for us. And then a photo on the right is a recent image taken about a week ago of the wellhead of UD1, our deep production well. So we're awaiting the power plant delivery, which should be later this year. What's been really great about this project is whilst we started with, the key aim was to generate power and to prove that it's possible, is that there's also been a number of sort of additionality sort of projects that have come off the side of it. So the major one being that Cornwall Council has really embraced geothermal and wants to connect our United Downs plant to a new housing development called Landguard Garden Village, which is about 6 or 7 kilometres away from the plant. But their aim is for it to be the UK's first sort of essentially zero carbon housing development. And maybe a month ago, the project received £22 million from the UK government's Green Heat Network Fund. So it's really great to see confidence in geothermal in the sector and its opportunities growing and growing. There have also been a number of research projects, which I won't drill into in detail here now because I don't have too much time, but on the left, you've got 3 projects that were completed earlier this year or before, and then we've got 4 projects that are live. Now, these are large, generally European consortiums looking at any aspect of geothermal energy, from using AI to optimize geothermal drilling, through looking at the possibility of seasonal heat storage in mines nearby in Cornwall, and also looking at the extraction of critical raw materials such as lithium and others from geothermal fluids. So these really exciting projects, they give us an opportunity to sort of use and harness the expertise of the academic world as well as other industry players in a number of topics that perhaps as a small and growing industry, we haven't had the capital to invest in ourselves. So they've been really fantastic opportunities along the way. And then just to touch on some future developments, because now that we're most of the way through the United Downs project, we'll have the power plant there very, very soon. It's been a really optimal time for us to secure funding and move forward with plans for rolling this industry out across the southwest of the UK. So our aims are to generate low carbon, 24/7 power, heat and lithium across a portfolio of sort of relatively small power projects throughout the southwest. Each project will be around 5 megawatts in power, and therefore about 20 megawatts in heat. They'll all come with net increases in biodiversity, opportunities for the local economy, because we try to purchase as much as possible from local contractors. And at United Downs, we did spend, well, both so far, we've spent more than 1.5 million in the local economy. There's also the potential to generate hundreds of both direct and indirect green jobs from all of the local people that we're using for all of those local contracts. As well as spreading out the sort of geothermal education programme across the UK, actually, though mostly across Cornwall and Devon. I just wanted to touch there on site selection because it is difficult. Whilst the resource in Cornwall is significant, the granite body really does stretch all the way from Dartmoor out to the Isles of Scilly in the far off the west off the edge of this map here. But actually finding a viable site and getting planning permission for it is quite a struggle. So on this map, you can see in red our United Downs site. You can then see 2 further sites in blue, which we've achieved planning permission for, and 2 more sites which are in the sort of planning application process at the moment. There are then a number of other sites that we have sort of selected, and we're in different stages of negotiation or sort of preparing for the planning application. But finding these really rely on us, of course, reaching the geological target. That's really important. So we need the granite and we need a fault zone to be able to get the permeability that we need for resource. But particularly in Cornwall, we also need to be able to access the site with a very large rig, which essentially means we need to be within 1 or 2 kilometres of a major A road, preferably just off the A road. We also need access to a grid connection, which is a real problem here in a lot of the UK, but particularly down here in southwest England, because a lot of the grid infrastructure is not fit for purpose and cannot support any additional connection. And we also need to be away from environmentally sensitive areas, whether that's SSSIs or AONBs or any number of acronyms you can think of, which is particularly difficult in an area of the country, which is, I think, a third of it is covered with areas of outstanding natural beauty, and that's just one of those sensitivities. There's then a number of other things I've listed out here in blue, which are sort of ideals, and absolutely we need them for a site, but they're sort of the next level down of priorities. And not least, do you need a landowner who is willing to lease or sell you the land, which generally means they have to be quite passionate about climate change, because a lot of landowners down here do not want to see their land turned over to development. So our plans for these new sites as we move forward is that once we have a site selected and sort of legals put in place, then we want each site to take around 3 years from the planning through to power plant construction and completion. Now, each phase, of course, this will really depend on a number of factors, depend on the results of initial surveys, the availability of key equipment, which of course is highly dependent on the oil and gas market. But in general, it can be done with about 6 months of site preparation, 6 to 9 months of drilling, and that's 2 wells, testing and development of up to about 6 months, and then power plant construction of about 14 months. So if you can plan well, you can get that all done through in 3 years. Then the plan will be is that we use the same rig and we shift it and we drill consecutively at each site. So we'll do 2 wells and then shift it just down the road and drill another 2 wells. And this will significantly decrease mobilization and demobilization costs for us, which is really, really important for a small and growing industry. So just my final slide actually is just there are a number of challenges for the industry, but just one that I wanted to pick out is that we really require support, and that's at all levels. Because it's a new industry, people don't know that much about geothermal here in the UK. There's a big education piece going on and will continue to go on for many years, no doubt, with all levels of government and the different ministries and departments, with our local council, which down here is Cornwall Council, and that's at many different levels because people don't tend to talk to each other. So you've got to do it at the cabinet level, at the planning and development team level, and of course at the parish council level as well. Then we also need to have this education spread out through the different regulatory bodies. So here I've just listed out a few key ones: the Health and Safety Executive, the Environment Agency, and the North Sea Transition Authority, who all potentially have had input into the sort of the well designs, how you run a site, of course, the environmental risks potentially associated with it. So they need to understand what a geothermal development can look like and how a good one should be done. And that's all underpinned by, of course, local community acceptance as well. A big part of what we've done at United Downs and will continue to do is getting the local community on board, because their opinion matters and it feeds into the parish council and therefore the planning team and the council cabinet's decisions. And essentially, if you can't get them on board, your project can be stalled for many years and potentially forever. So having all of the support is really, really key to the industry moving forward. So I've raced through that. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions, but I'll hand over to our next speaker. Thank you all for listening.
Thanks, Hazel. And yes, the questions are pouring in, so everyone please keep asking away in that chat box. Next, we're going to bring up Tony Bennett from Eden Geothermal. Tony, I'm going to hand things off to you. Tony, I think you're on mute.
Okay, sorry about that. Yes, thanks, Kate, for handing over. Let me just get the presentation up. Right, apologies for that. So I'm going to talk very much about the Eden project, which I've been involved in for actually the past 11 years. This is very similar in concept to Hazel's description of what's being carried out at United Downs. It was a majority EU funded project that's now just been completed, the first stage of it. The background I've got is that I did work on the Hot Dry Rocks project back in the 1980s initially, which was a research project funded by the UK government largely, to look at being able to use sort of homogeneous fractured crystalline rock as a means of passing cold water through it to get hot water back. As a result of further sort of research from that, the thinking then turned to actually targeting structures within the granite that were likely to be far more permeable than a sort of a homogeneous mass of granite with fractures in it. And that was the thinking that really led to both the United Downs project and the project at Eden. And I was slightly involved as well in the United Downs project during the sort of drilling and testing stage. So what the concept of Eden is very much the same as Hazel's outlined. The aim is to drill 2 wells to target a potentially permeable, deep permeable fault structure within the granite, and to use that as, inverted commas, your reservoir. Now, ideally, we want to get hot water out of the fracture. We hope it's a sort of saturated fault structure. We can get hot water back and then dispose of the cool water back into the subsurface again, and just circulate the system that way. So the funding for this largely came from the European Union. when some ERDF funding was available to Cornwall at the time. And this was funded as an industrial research project, largely. The funding available wasn't sufficient to do the whole project, to drill both wells and to put a built power plant up, but it was sufficient to drill one well, test that well, prove the concept, and therefore sort of give people confidence to take private financing forward to invest further and complete the project. So the overall aim was to have a hot water project that initially met the heat and power demands of the Eden project itself. We believe that the overall capacity of this plant will be greater than Eden needs, and therefore the sort of surplus energy would be exported in the form of power onto the national grid. That was the initial concept that was set up. What we've done after 3 years is we started off in October 2019. Initially, because we had to follow very stringent European protocol about how we acquire services and equipment, it took us a year to go through tendering services, raising contracts, all within European guidelines for all the services we need. And if you're familiar with the services required with oil and gas drilling, we were looking at very much the same thing. So it's bringing together not only a drilling rig, but all the services to go with it, all the supply chain to keep that going. So that took us about a year. We then had to prepare a drill site. We knew we were going to have a 450-ton drill rig on site. So this needed to be a level site of about 12 to 15,000 square meters to accommodate the drill rig and the sort of working area around the drill rig, to have a one-way transport system through, plus all the sort of cabins and facilities that had to go through that. That took us a further sort of 6 to 7 months. And then we started drilling the first well. We anticipated the well would take about 150 days to drill down to about 4,500 meters vertical depth. We ended up doing it in about 165 days. The drilling went very smoothly. In retrospect, there was no fishing operations, nothing like that. It went pretty much to schedule. So it went slightly over budget. However, we were hampered really badly by having to do this while Brexit was going on, and also in the middle of the COVID pandemic, all of which just added a nightmare to an already sort of technically quite difficult program. What we've ended up with at the moment, having drilled and tested the first well, is that part of the European output, we had to demonstrate greenhouse gas savings, and we had to demonstrate some sort of thermal power output. Now, you're quite restrained about demonstrating greenhouse gas savings with a single well alone. And the only way we could do it was to install a coaxial heat system, where you inject cold water down the annulus of a well and you produce warm water, which has picked up heat from the sides of the well as it's gone down up a sort of central tubing, as shown in the diagram here. And the aim is for greenhouse gas savings to be demonstrated, you have to have a demand for it. So we're using this heat to supply heat to the nursery and the biomes at the Eden project, which is a ready available heat source online. The Eden project itself is about 1 kilometre away from the geothermal site, so we had to lay a heat main down to supply that. The next stage we're looking at is to raise funding for drilling the second deep well, continue development of the plant, and then we'll be in a position to supply heat and power to Eden and to export sort of surplus power to the national grid. That's the aim, but at the moment we are doing the coaxial heat demonstration. So what have we achieved during this time? I think it's really important to emphasize we've drilled one of the longest the longest, not the deepest. United Downs has drilled the deepest geothermal well in the UK. We have the longest one simply because we went at slightly more inclination. We've gone down to a depth of 5,200 meters measured depth. We've demonstrated we can drill these tight, long deviated wells in hard crystalline fractured rock without any major technical issues. And that's a huge step forward, because one of the things when we were initially looking for funding, investors were saying, well, why do we want to fund an exploration well effectively with a technical risk that you're never going to achieve the depth you want? Because it just hasn't been done that often. So all this has helped build up confidence about that. We've managed to carry out well testing. We've used airlift reduction test techniques to demonstrate productivity. We've also, seismicity is a big issue with geothermal development. So we've demonstrated the use of being able to monitor accurately what seismicity is taking place and to use that as a control measure for well testing operations. So we minimize the likelihood of getting felt seismic events. Having said that, we did have one felt seismic event during our well testing. We've also carried out a small acid treatment to try and reduce the near wellbore impedance. And we've run the deepest coaxial system in the world, we believe, with putting down 3,800 meters of coaxial tubing and demonstrating how that works. So we've improved the understanding of drilling, seismicity, and sort of the geological uncertainty that goes with geothermal. Having said that, there's still risk impacts that we need to address. Understanding regional and local deep geology is an issue. Although, you know, there's United Downs, there's Eden, we still don't have an overall understanding of the region as a whole. We need to understand the sort of geophysical surveying techniques to define target structures prior to drilling. We haven't really sort of bottomed that out yet. We need to understand the limitations to drilling deep wells in fractured crystalline rock, and we need to be able to locate high permeability structures in advance. We need to also enhance our ability to control seismicity during the development stage of deep geothermal. And as all part and parcel of that, as Hazel's already alluded to, we have to bring on board public perception and acceptance of deep geothermal. And I think in Cornwall, certainly there is a really good public perception and acceptance of it. And that needs to be sort of improved as we go on. We need successful projects if we're going to get the UK, you know, this accepted within the UK and to get it as an important part. Up till now, geothermal in the UK, especially deep geothermal, is way behind what's happening in other places in Europe. We have to bring the development costs down, you know, especially the drilling costs. We are sort of governed by using oil and gas technology, and therefore we end up having to use oil and gas related prices, and that really does restrict the ability to take deep geothermal forward. There needs to be government incentivization for private investment in deep geothermal, which has been lacking within the UK government. And I don't want to get political over this, but I think had it not been for EU funding being available, neither project would have taken place in Cornwall. We need to facilitate the ability to export power. At the moment, the national grid is woefully inadequate, especially in Cornwall, for renewable schemes to come online, especially geothermal schemes, and export into the grid. For example, at Eden, at the moment, we cannot get a grid export until 2036. And that really sort of inhibits your business case. Public relations and perception needs to be promoted, and I think, you know, both projects have been well underway on that. Both projects, deep geothermal requires a wide skill set. It's the sort of skill set that's readily available within the oil and gas sector, and I think, you know, leaping on one here, there's a huge potential here to transition between oil and gas and deep geothermal, both sort of investment-wise and personnel-wise. And what deep geothermal needs, in my opinion, is sort of young people, young graduates with expertise and enthusiasm to take forward this technology, because it's at a relatively novel sort of stage within the UK. And I think there's a massive opportunity here to take it forward. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Tony. Okay, I think we're going to pass things over to David, who is in the same room as Tony. Hi, David. Whenever you're ready, you can start sharing your screen.
Thank you, Kate. And thank you, Tony. And by coincidence, Tony and I are in the same room. We're actually in Geoscience Limited's office in Cornwall today because we're working on a project assessing the potential for heat recovery from flooded mines across Cornwall for provision into local heat networks. So I will try to share Tony's slides because I wouldn't know what to say, but I have a as Monty Python would say, now for something completely different. I have spent my whole career so far, which has been decades, trying to understand where and how to do deep geothermal energy and shallow geothermal energy and all variations of geothermal energy in the UK in a commercially viable way. So I run a company called TownRock Energy. We're a team of 12, mostly young, passionate geoscientists and engineers, but with a board composed of ex-oil industry veterans. And we work across all types of geothermal energy resource in the UK. One of our main areas of focus is extraction from flooded mine workings, but we've also progressed a number of deep geothermal projects through feasibility, business case, and are currently in sort of fundraising stage. And we're also a designer and facilitator of shallow geothermal systems for heating and cooling. And one of those projects is the topic of my conversation today. So Body Heat is a project which you may have heard of. I can officially say I'm the inventor of Body Heat, but it was definitely a team effort making this project a reality. And the problem that really I think we're all trying to solve, and I'm sure many people in the oil and gas industry are equally aligned with wanting to solve this issue, is the one of a rapidly accelerating global temperature caused by carbon emissions and other greenhouse gases. Another problem is actually the amount of greenwashing that's occurring across all sectors, whereby it's clearly fashionable to say you're doing the right thing, but in reality, it's more profitable to do the minimum amount of the right thing and continue doing mostly the wrong thing. There's also a problem that vast amounts of energy is wasted, and many of that waste energy is in the form of waste heat. So exploring innovative ways to capture, store, and reuse waste heat in whatever form it's generated in is really important. The body heat solution is designed for high-capacity venues, whereby the source of waste heat is the crowd themselves, especially when dancing to good music. Potentially sports venues, leisure centers, gym classes are another application, or very busy offices. But our focus has been on the venues that have high quality music playing and lots of people attending to enjoy themselves. One of the key motivators for focusing on the music industry and focusing on dancers is because this is one of those rare climate change solutions that encourages people to do more of what they love, and for the output of that to be a net positive for the environment. I'll talk about how it works briefly, but we essentially capture body heat from a venue. In fact, I think I'll just talk about the venue first. So we have a ex-industrial building between two really busy railway lines in the southwest of Glasgow City, which you can see in the background here. This actually has 3 venues within it that has and the total capacity of the building is 6,000 people. So they often have 1,000 people or more coming through a few times a week. It's a mixed use venue, so there are also other uses during normal hours during the week for offices, art studios, and they also so there's a kind of combination of cooling demands required in the evenings and the weekends, and then heating demands required during working hours. When people are entering the building, quite often it's Scotland, it's going to be a little chilly. So we actually would preheat the room prior to people coming in from the body heat system, using some of the heat from from the thermal store in the ground that was previously saved. Then when people start dancing, they might start generating 500 or 600 watts, whereas when they first entered and they were just standing around, they might only generate 150 or 200 watts. So we see a rapid increase in the temperature of the room, and many of you that have been out to gigs or clubs will experience that yourselves. So we cool down the air in the room, and that heat is transferred via refrigerant loops to a plant room. In the plant room, we have 2 heat pumps. One of them can transfer heat in and out of the boreholes, and the other one can transfer heat to other areas of the building that need heating at that point in time, or for hot water usage. When it's transferred into the boreholes, which is the usual function, then it heats up the ground, and the ground becomes a very large thermal battery, and we can then extract that when we need heat back in the building at another time. The physical infrastructure inside the building looks like a normal kind of air conditioning unit. The plant room is a shipping container that we've refurbished and put 2 heat exchangers and a heat exchanger and a number of pumps in, 2 heat pumps and heat exchanger, sorry. And then we've got about 150 meters of trenched surface pipework that connects to a manifold that then interfaces with 12 200-meter deep boreholes. And they're underneath the community garden on the side of the building. We've got then a cumulative 2.4 kilometers of conduction-based thermal transfer from those boreholes. So we can be extracting heat from the ground and rejecting heat into the ground, all through conduction by circulating a carrier fluid that's either hotter or colder than the ground that interfaces with the heat pumps in the plant room. When we first turned the system on, it was September last year, and this graph shows the first few weeks of operation. It has been operating since then, but we're still in the process of collecting and processing all the data. So this graph shows those first few weeks, and it shows that we didn't need to use the system for heating, but we did use it for cooling across 8 events during that period. And you can see the temperature in the boreholes rapidly increases as and this is measuring the fluid going into the boreholes, rapidly increases as heat is being removed from the room during those events. And then it dissipates into the surrounding bedrock, spreading that heat out across a very large volume of rock. We really want to make sure that people don't only have, a negative connotation towards fighting climate change. It's got to be fun. It's got to be interesting. It's got to motivate people. And so, yes, behavioral change is necessary, but also this type of solution can be used to get people very excited about alternative solutions as well that are going to be an enhancer of people's lives and improve the way that we live in a net zero world. And briefly, this has been a collaboration between my company, TownRock Energy, and the venue where we built this, SWG3. And we bring a number of both technical and then commercial and marketing expertise together. And we're now looking as we optimize and expand the system at SWG3, we're also looking to roll this out to other key venues around the world. It's been a story that the media have quite taken to, and these were actually figures that I picked up in February. I think now we're at over 340 global media pieces. So that figure will be over 6 million now. And we've been featured in the New York Times and the BBC and a few other high-profile outlets. And the core technology in the body heat system is off the shelf. But the way that we've integrated together and the use case here has been the story that the media and the general public have really, really engaged with. So there's a piece of advice here around, we don't need to be constantly inventing completely brand new things, but if we're using existing technology and applying it in a way and telling a story about it in a way that gets people really excited, then we can have a much bigger impact with regards to behavioral change and also change in the investment community. And as the previous talks have mentioned, eventually the government. These are just some of the headlines that we've got and some links, and we'll share these slides afterwards so you can see some of the media appearances if you wish. And otherwise, here's a picture of people enjoying themselves in the main event space at SWG3. And if you wish to find out more, we have a website that has a video, and there's also a survey if you, or more likely anyone in your network, has a venue or works with venues and would like to have a screening exercise done on the potential for body heat to save them money and save them carbon emissions, then please get in touch via the website. Thank you very much for listening, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, David. I think, Hazel, if you can turn on your camera, I'm going to start pulling questions from the audience. We've been getting them all throughout your presentations, all of which were great. So thank you all very much for sharing your projects with us today. So I'm going to start. We have a lot of highly technical questions, but I'm going to start with sort of an easier question. It was originally aimed at Hazel, but I think all three of you can perhaps talk about this a little bit. And that was, do landowners, or I guess anyone really in the UK, have any financial incentives to have a geothermal project on their land?
So yeah, from the deep geothermal side, I'll start with the power project side. I mean, the incentive is any kind of commercial contract that we put in place with them. So by standard, that would be a lease agreement that, you know, it's fairly standard. You get money for the land you give us, potentially tying to revenue as well. So there's incentive for it to come online quickly, and for the project to be successful, of course, as well. There's no sort of power incentive for deep geothermal landowners from the government or anything like that. It is all in commercial arrangements. Yeah, but I'm sure Tony and David can follow on with a shallower perspective as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, Eden's a bit of an unusual case in that obviously Eden had very much an incentive as a landowner to benefit from gaining their own sort of heat and power supply. And at the time, Eden was very keen to be seen to be deriving all this from a renewable source. So that's kind of unusual, I guess. But, you know, going on from what Hazel says, I guess, short of having a sort of contractual arrangements and rental agreements for land use, then you know, there isn't a vast incentive for power for landowners to say, yes, we would like this on our site.
That's why it has to come from the climate change argument, as David was just saying. You know, they have to be passionate about it.
Oh, that's a fair point. David, is there any sort of incentive for installing, just in general, emission saving projects on private land? Because obviously you're working with someone who's a venue owner as opposed to someone who owns a large field. Is there any incentive for them?
I mean, we work predominantly on heating projects, and that requires there to be heat demand. So quite often our ideal projects are a large heat customer that has land which their facilities sit on top of. And essentially what we do with geothermal is make best use of the land underneath their site, which is otherwise not being used as a source of energy. So there's direct benefit to them maximizing the asset that they already own with regards to their own land ownership to meet their on-site energy demands, with far less space requirements, as Hazel showed with other sources of renewables. But the main incentives are cost saving. So you reduce your annual energy expenditure significantly by using the ground as a source of heating or cooling. And right now, of course, there's a big push for low carbon types of heating, because we've kind of cracked electricity to a degree in the UK, and we need to move on with the 50% of our heat demand, of our energy demand is heat. So there are large grants available for commercial enterprises and local authorities to build this infrastructure. And, you know, we work regularly with clients to help them navigate the funding opportunities that are from, you know, UK and Scottish government and other sources.
That's great. Excuse me, sorry. No, I mean, I think the financial case is probably one of the harder ones to address with geothermal. We were talking about this before we started, that from the oil and gas perspective, the profits aren't as high in geothermal. And so you need some sort of other incentive, other financial incentive, at least for the oil industry to hop on to the geothermal industry and, you know, help it grow. A related question to that, can anyone, I think this is mostly for Hazel or for Tony, can you comment on the importance of other revenue streams for making the business case for these geothermal projects, i.e., you know, extracting lithium for the brines or any other, you know, dual use geothermal projects that you have?
Would you like to start, Tony?
Okay. Yeah, probably more in Hazel's court this a bit. Lithium is an obvious example of something that can go hand in hand with geothermal extraction, in looking at natural brines from the rock which contain lithium. And, you know, there may be other minerals in the future that will be of value. There is a slight difficulty, of course, with geothermal in that you have extracting heat from the ground is not seen to be of direct value to somebody who owns the ground itself. Once you start extracting minerals, it becomes a bit different, especially in Cornwall, where there's a mineral ownership issue. You extract minerals, so that all has to be dealt with as part of any bonus you may get from the business case. But I think deep geothermal on its own needs to look at other things that would be available, you know, to build a business case up to make it of more value.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just following on from that. I mean, during both of our developments, of course, it's been a long road. As I said, well, the company was set up in 2008. The site was secured in 2010. I mean, there was a huge period of fundraising, which was quite difficult for projects that are demonstrating a concept in a new country. So you do rely on other revenue streams, even initially, you know, before your wells are drilled, coming from research projects, from grants and the like. They're super, super important. Once it's operational, then yes, absolutely. If you can add a big heat demand, if you can add something like lithium extraction, it does boost your numbers significantly. And the last couple of years, since sort of the lithium renaissance has happened down here, as it were, people have become a lot more interested, which has been great to see. It's a real boost to investment potential in deep geothermal.
Great. Sort of a little bit off topic, but kind of having to do with the community surrounding these projects. Has there been any real pushback from the community, either because of the structures themselves, or, you know, any seismic events? I think, Tony, you might have mentioned, I think someone mentioned a seismic event in their talk. So are you experiencing any, I guess, trouble with the surrounding community, and do you have any advice for how to handle that? Either Hazel or Tony.
Okay.
Yeah,
I think it's a really important issue how we handle public perception of all this and how we deal with it. The interesting thing was, when you look at what the public were worried about with United Downs when it first started, it was a noise problem. They were worried about having a drilling rig on site, a large rig going to work 24/7, and how that was going to affect the local community. Eden was a bit different. Eden, the community around there didn't seem to be so phased about the noise aspect, but they were very worried about the potential seismicity that might kick off. And I think the reason for that was people were able to Google geothermal to look at what the pros and cons of geothermal, and the obvious con that comes up a lot is seismicity. And it's a really difficult thing to explain to the lay person what seismicity is, what the risks associated with it are, what the impacts associated with it are. And it's something I think as a geothermal sector we need to address. We need to know how to address. But I don't know an easy answer to this, and it'll be interesting to see what Hazel says about this. But seismicity can be a problem, and I think it's because people just aren't used to it in the UK. You know, we have relatively small seismic events taking place. If you go to New Zealand, for example, and they start up a geothermal power plant, it's usually associated with quite a lot of seismicity that kicks off, and the local community accept that. They just say, oh, that's the local power plant starting up. We need to get into that position in the UK, I think.
Yeah, no, I think those are really, really valid points. And it also makes it extra hard when you're trying to communicate to a community that's not used to seismicity, is that a lot of the people who know a lot about seismicity are in these environments that are very active, that you know, they say, oh, you received a magnitude 1, why do I care? Like, that's so irrelevant. But we do care. The people down here have felt it. I mean, Tony said, as you said, you know, there was one very widely felt. There were several widely felt down at United Downs site as well. So it's been, for me, I think my perspective, so I joined the United Downs project sort of midway through testing. So seismicity communication was already quite far underway. We had the community engagement manager from sort of 6 months before drilling started, and she's always been very open about the possibility of seismicity and going out into all possible communities to talk about it, amongst other issues. And her job has been really, really vital to get out there, going to small groups, building trust with people on an individual basis. So it is time consuming, but that's been really, really important. And then, you know, I've come in where people have seemed rather happy. You know, we haven't really had any complaints about seismicity. People have felt it, but they've been more interested than anything else. And then we've gone on to look at future sites that are still in Cornwall, but, you know, maybe 10 kilometres away, 20 kilometres away. And it's been a whole new education process. This community is suddenly like, oh my God, you're going to, you know, destroy our houses. You're going to do this, you're going to do that. As Tony said, noise is a big issue again, people talk about. But, you know, we've had to create long response documents to various objections on our planning portal that cover 20 different issues, you know, topics of issues, whether that's potential for radon release or seismicity or noise or light pollution or you name it, any environmental impact they can think of, people are objecting about it. So yeah, it's a big challenge. It's not a problem, it's just something you have to do, and you have to do it in every small community. There's no way of just doing a blanket job.
That's a good point. Hazel, I think a good follow-up question from the chat. We have a question from Karen Spenley that is asking, are you planning other sites in the Southwest? And then we also have a question from Lisa Lewis that's asking, based on your experience with the United Downs site, like, are there any, I guess, lessons learned that is giving you ideas of ways that you can change your process, either from engaging the community or the technical side as well on any future projects?
Gosh, yes, there are lots of lessons learned. Just to start with the easy question, yes, in the Southwest, I mean, we have 2 more permitted sites, we have 2 more in planning at the moment. And then we have another sort of, I think it's 3 or 4 coming up behind that we're hoping for. So yeah, we hope to have quite a large portfolio across the Southwest. And we do dabble in more, generally it's consultancy across other parts of the UK too. We're part of a consortium in Northern Ireland as well called Geothermal NI. So absolutely, it's great to see interest growing across the UK, and it's great that people approach us interested to start developing it in all manners. Lessons learned, quickly, I mean, Tony will definitely be able to weigh in on this, having been involved at United Downs in the earlier days. But I guess for the future sites, it has all been education, has been the really big important lesson that we've learned. And I think we will be tweaking well designs. You know, we don't think we need to go quite as deep with the production well. We can go more like 4.5. We'll likely be doing sidetracks as well off the 2 different wells, and that's to increase permeability, increase potential flow rates. So there's little tweaks along the way. Generally, we're pleased. You know, we had no major accidents or incidents, no major, you know, the site was never shut down. The wells have reacted how we expected. We've done soft stimulation, and that's been very much a learning process as to how to effectively stimulate the system. And I'm sure we'll continue learning in future sites as well.
That's great. So Hazel, Tony, you both have mentioned, you know, raising awareness of the community in the surrounding areas. But David, we have a question for you. How aware are the dancers that move, that their heat is being, how aware are they that their heat that they're generating as they dance is being stored?
Yeah, so they don't have to change, you know, it's a very discrete system. So it's not in their face, and there's probably plenty of people going in there that have no idea what's going on. But one thing we've done to raise awareness, aside from having some, you know, little explainer signs on the wall, we've got everyone manning the bars, and every member of staff at SWG3 wear a body heat hoodie, and it's got the body heat logo across the back, and that gets people having discussions about it. And you know, the BBC footage that came out, a couple of videos where there's some great interviews with people that are either going in or coming out of a gig, who are talking about their enthusiasm for the system. And you know, I think that the conversation seems very, very broad. You know, it's about, wow, this is so innovative, this is so cool, what else can we do? I'm so happy that, you know, I'm making some positive impact on the environment. So yeah, at SPE broad, and we also want to make sure that merch is throughout all the other venues that we build body heat systems, and even have, you know, we're looking at pop-up events at various festivals as well.
It's great. I actually have a technical question for you, David. It's actually a couple parts. What cost per megawatt hour does the body heat system work out to be? And what is the payback length of time for a typical system? And finally, what does the carrier fluid consist of for a body heat system?
Okay, the carrier fluid going through the boreholes is a 10% glycol, 90% water mix that helps more thermal energy be transferred within the fluid per volume of fluid. And also if we're really in the middle of winter cranking it up for heat consumption, and we drop the fluid below 0, it doesn't freeze, it keeps working. The other two questions, sorry, the first question was cost. Yeah, so the COP of the system is about 4, but we're actually still collecting a full suite of data. And actually at Christmas time, we connected another building. So there's a new graffiti studio being connected, and that's had an impact on the overall efficiency. So we're collecting a lot of data. We don't have hard figures for that, but the efficiency is about, well, COP of 4 means about 400%. So 1 unit of electrical energy in means 4 units of heat out. And the cooling side is a little bit lower on that efficiency. It's like 3.5. But those are currently estimates because we're analyzing the data that we have.
That's great. Do you have an estimated payback time for the system?
Yeah, we've estimated 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
Just so you guys are aware, we have about 3 minutes left in the session. We still have a lot of technical questions that we haven't gotten to yet. Are you okay with hanging on for a few more minutes to get through some of those questions?
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Great. Okay, we're gonna plow right into them then, and I apologize because drilling and things like that are not my area of expertise, so you'll have to bear with me a little bit when I'm reading these questions. But Hazel, this first one is for you. What is the cycle time for water to get from the injection well back to the production well, and how do you monitor this?
Well, because we don't have an operational plant yet, we don't monitor it. The wells are static as they stand, so it will be something that's monitored in the power plant, but I'm afraid I can't give you an honest answer to that at the moment.
Okay. Do you have an expected flow rate and temperature for the first United Downs production well? Yeah,
so we measured the bottom hole temperature. The highest measurement we got was 188 degrees Celsius. So obviously we expect some changes during operation, but that's the sort of the current level we're at. So that would be producing at the surface at maybe 165, 170 once it's operational. Flow rates are, well, they will vary through time, and we only tested it for about a week back in July 21, so it's still TBD, but the aim would be about 40 litres a second.
Great. Tony, this question is for you. What depth was the 9 5/8 casing set at? Are you confident that the 8.5 hole will still be open? 8.5 foot hole.
Okay. I can answer the first question very easily. It was set at just under 4,000 meters, the 9 5/8 inch casing. We had a slight problem when we did it because unfortunately we hit a fairly big loss zone just where the casing shear was going to be. So we had to cement that up first before we could run the casing and then place the cement. We've had a slight problem at Eden with the bottom hole section of the well in that we ended up drilling it at reaching an inclination of 40 degrees. Now, there's nothing that excessive about 40 degrees except the fact that you're in granite and the hole is fairly rough. So we've had difficulties running wireline tools down through the open hole section to get sort of full characterization of it. And we have noticed that I don't think we're getting breakouts, but we're possibly getting stuff coming in when we do production tests on the well. We're possibly dragging in chippings, for example, that have been lost in the loss zone back into the well, that's possibly got down into the well. And I think there probably is some fragmentation taking place within the open hole section that does make it difficult. So, you know, it may be in the longer term, we might have to run a liner within the open hole section, whether it's perforated, pre-perforated or post-perforated, just to ensure the integrity of access down that part of the well.
Great. And I think a follow-on question, maybe, not entirely sure. There's several questions about drill bits. What type of drill bits did you use for the Eden Deep Geothermal project or Deep Geothermal well? And where was the, yes, and what expertise have you drawn from the drilling industry to help establish the lessons learned from the original well and how these lessons can be applied going forward?
Okay, it's a big unknown when you first drill a well into a relatively new geology. It's exactly what rock type you're going to come across and how hard it is, and et cetera, et cetera. So we had the benefit of Eden of doing our first well after the United Downs wells had been drilled. And I do remember at United Downs, when I was involved in that, I think the granite was expected to be a lot harder than it actually ended up being, based on what had been found in the hot dry rock project in the 1980s. But of course, the geological situation was slightly different. Although we were drilling into the same granite mass, we were targeting fault structures. Therefore, at United Downs, the rock ended up being softer than was expected. However, given that we're looking at tricone road, three-cone bits with tungsten carbide inserts with special bearings to withstand the sort of the rigors of drilling in hard rock, we had to place an order for bits, and there was quite a long lead-in time for these bits. So therefore, when United Downs was being drilled, it was rather, we had the bits delivered before the well was drilled, obviously, because we needed them, but these bits ended up being slightly harder than were actually best required, and we had to look around at rather short notice to try and get some more appropriate bits. And that can be a problem with these long lead-in times for relatively specialized bits. When we came to drill Eden, we went with a softer bit. We still went with roller cone TCI, but we went for sort of middle of the range hard rock with that, and they worked well. They were supplied by one company. We went out to tender to see, who we felt were the most beneficial companies to do this, and all the companies said they'd have to do some tests beforehand on whatever rock was available in order to come up with a bit design. So I don't know if that helps answer that.
No, thank you. Unfortunately, I don't know if that helps answer it, but I'm sure the audience was very happy with that answer. I'm going to ask one last closing question, and I think it's really aimed at all three of you, as all three of you have broad experience in the geothermal industry. And that question is, what are your thoughts about geothermal from hot sedimentary systems like in the Netherlands or Germany? Development of these operations are relatively cheaper and have less problems with seismicity. Moreover, a lot more transferable skills and knowledge from the well-established oil and gas sector. So if all of you want to comment on that, whoever, Tony, would you like to start first? You're first on my screen.
I think the future of geothermal in the UK probably is steered towards heat at the moment, and therefore if you're going to look down heat as a route, you don't need to have to drill so deep. Therefore, looking at aquifer type systems is probably a really logical way to take geothermal forward to start with, and to focus on that. I think there are problems with deep drilling that can be avoided, but I also think that for the deep geothermal sector to move forward, there's a huge skill set within the oil and gas industry that can help with that. I know the wells sound deep. They're not really that deep compared to worldwide oil and gas wells. So I think two industries should really sort of come together on that and help with that. But yes, initially I can see sort of aquifer deposits being more attractive maybe than focusing on deep geothermal, in my view.
David, Hazel, do either of you have any other additional insights you'd like to add?
Yeah, I would say there's been one project that proved resource in Southampton about 40 years ago, and we've had a massive uptick in interest in hot sedimentary basins in the last year and a half. There's a couple of projects now we're moving forward with some large heat customers. yeah, it's a no-brainer. Why hasn't it been done already? I mean, if we'd taken all the money that was spent on the shale gas industry a few years ago and put that into drilling, medium depth geothermal wells into the same sedimentary basins, we would have a burgeoning industry right now where oil and gas companies could also be making some share of that revenue and profit. But instead, that money was wasted on a continued propagation of fossil fuels, which didn't really work out. So yes, let's do it now. Let's get it right now. And there's 5 big sedimentary basins in the UK that all have dozens of projects within ready to be developed.
Great. Hazel, any thoughts?
Yeah, I guess one last thought. I mean, I would say don't have any bias towards or against any kind of geothermal reservoir system. I mean, absolutely, hot sedimentary aquifers are great, are proven across the world. I think depends on the project that's being done. Is it got a specific heat demand or power demand? Therefore, you've got to generate whatever you are planning to generate at that location. If you can get that from a sedimentary aquifer, perfect. Why not? If it's shallower than 5 kilometers, even better. Reduce costs. It really depends on what you're aiming for, where the project is, and what therefore the geology is like below it, whether that's fractured or sedimentary or volcanic elsewhere in the world. Doesn't really matter. You just need hot rocks, you need fluid, and you need it to flow nicely.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank all 3 of you for the really great presentations and the thoughtful answers to all the questions. Apologies to people in the audience whose questions we didn't get to. We're already 7 minutes over, so I think it's time to wrap things up. But thank you all for attending. I'm so glad I see some members of the Europe SPE in the audience as well. So thank you for joining us with the London SPE group. And we will see you next month for our next webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.